A small dog walked out of the house where the last Tsarevich of Russia was killed. He kept walking. He crossed the continent, boarded a ship, arrived in England, and lived out his years on quiet lawns. The boy who loved him did not see 13. This is the strange hierarchy of history. Palaces fell. Empires signed themselves away in single afternoons. Queens went to prison. Kings died in foreign countries, and their pets kept eating. 10 dynasties, 10 collapses, 10 small witnesses who outlived the humans who owned them. What survived alongside them is stranger than what did not. Number 10 begins in a house in Yekaterinburg with painted-over windows. In the summer of 1918, the Romanov family was living in 2 rooms in a courtyard. A year before, they had lived at the Alexander Palace, with tutors, uniforms, private trains, and portraits in every corridor. The boy in the portraits was Alexei. He had hemophilia. His family had been arranging its life around his fragility for years. At his feet, in nearly every photograph, is a small brown and white King Charles spaniel. His name was Joy. The dynasty around Alexei looked eternal. It had ruled Russia for 300 years, but by 1917, the treasury was gutted by war. The peasantry had turned. The generals were disloyal. When the government asked Nicholas II to abdicate, he signed. He wrote in his diary that he had gone to bed early. That was the last real day of the Romanov Empire. House arrest at Tsarskoye Selo, then Tobolsk, then Ekaterinburg. The palace shrank into a merchant's house with whitewash on the glass. Servants grew fewer. So did the dogs. Joy was still there. So was Ortepo, a French bulldog, and Jimmy, another spaniel. On the night of July 17, 1918, the family was taken to the basement. What happened there does not need to be described. The dynasty ended in a cellar. The dogs were not brought down. When the White Army arrived days later, Ortepo was dead. Jimmy was dead. Joy was found alive in the courtyard, thin and half-blind. A Russian officer, Colonel Paul Rodzianko, took him. Rodzianko carried the spaniel through the collapse of the Russian Civil War, across Siberia, through Vladivostok, onto a ship, and eventually to England. Joy went to Windsor. He lived out his years in the kennels of King George V. The King of England was Nicholas II's first cousin. In 1917, when the Romanovs might have been evacuated to Britain, George V's government had quietly withdrawn the offer of asylum. He was worried it would look bad at home. So the family stayed, and the dog eventually reached Windsor without them. Joy died of old age in England. He is buried on the grounds. The boy who loved him lay in a forest pit until Russian scientists identified the remains decades later. Joy did not know he had ended up living in the household of the man who could have saved his family. Joy died fed by servants. The heir did not live to see his teenage years. Not every royal pet was left behind in a country that was ending. Some were taken along into empires that were also finished. They just did not know it yet. Number 9 walks the corridors of Schönbrunn. The Habsburg court had ruled from Vienna for more than 600 years. When the Empress Elizabeth, called Sisi, walked those corridors in the 1880s, she walked with dogs, Great Danes, Irish wolfhounds, hunting hounds bred at imperial kennels. She was famously depressed, allergic to court ceremony, and traveled constantly. Her dogs traveled with her. Court photographers were instructed to include them in portraits. The empire behind those kennels was already unwell. 50 million people, 12 nationalities, one dynasty holding them together with marriages and old maps. Nationalism was eating it from the inside. In 1898, Sisi was murdered in Geneva by an Italian anarchist. In 1889, her only son had shot himself at a hunting lodge called Mayerling. In 1914, her nephew Franz Ferdinand was killed in Sarajevo. Franz Joseph, the old emperor, kept ruling. He also had to bury almost everyone he loved. He died in 1916, in the middle of a war, destroying his empire. Karl I inherited. He tried to negotiate peace and failed. In November 1918, he signed a document at Schönbrunn renouncing participation in state affairs. In 1919, the new Austrian Republic passed a law expelling the Habsburgs and confiscating their property. 6 centuries of dynasty ended in a signature. No shots at the palace. A pen did the work. Karl went to Switzerland, then Madeira. He died there in 1922, penniless, at 34. His widow was left with 8 children and no money. The extended family scattered. Some kept titles nobody was legally required to recognize. The Habsburg motto had been AEIOU. Austria will endure. The empire did not endure. It ended in weeks. Schönbrunn stayed. It became a museum. Some hunting dogs went to family estates in Hungary. Others remained on the palace grounds as it transitioned into state ownership. Palace inventories from the last imperial years still exist in the archives. They list animals by breed, by name, by which court official was responsible. The dogs kept eating from bowls that had once been polished by imperial servants. Someone in the New Republic quietly replaced the silver bowls with pewter. The dogs did not care. The empire fell in weeks. The dogs took a little longer. Some royal pets were fed by servants who no longer worked for royalty. The next one was fed by a queen who no longer had a country to be queen of. Number 8 waits at a gate in Paris. Marie Antoinette had loved small dogs since childhood in Vienna. As Queen of France, she had papillons and small spaniels painted into her portraits by Vigée Lebrun. They slept on her bed. They traveled with her carriage. They belonged, in the imagination of the court, to a queen with nothing to do but decorate her own life. That was not quite the truth. She was also a mother of children who kept dying. She was also a foreigner in a country that hated foreigners. She was cornered from the day she arrived. The Bourbon monarchy had been in trouble long before she reached it. The treasury was empty. Bread prices had been climbing for years. Enlightenment ideas had made the idea of kingship look absurd. Pamphlets accused her of every private crime available. The diamond necklace affair, which she had not been part of, made her look guilty of theft and vanity at once. 1789. The Bastille. The March on Versailles. The royal family was taken to the Tuileries. In 1791, they tried to flee. They were caught at Varennes and brought back. In August 1792, the monarchy was legally abolished. In January 1793, Louis XVI was executed. In October 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed. She died a common prisoner with a number. The dogs are harder to trace. Memoirs from the period speak of a small dog, sometimes named, sometimes not, reportedly at Versailles or the Temple prison, and later kept by a loyal servant. Some accounts say more than one animal. Others contradict them. Historians treat these stories as tradition rather than fact. What is verified is the portraits. Vigée Lebrun painted the queen with her dogs beside her, over and over. Those paintings hang in Versailles today. Versailles is a museum. The walls belong to the French state. The state was built on the negation of the queen who once paid for the paint. The Bourbons came back briefly in 1814 and 1824, then were pushed out for good in 1848. The queen's son, the presumed Louis XVII, died in the Temple prison. Her daughter married a cousin and had no children. The dog she once traveled with, if any single dog can be identified, disappeared into an unnamed household. The queen was recorded as prisoner. The dog was recorded as nothing at all. Only one of them left Paris alive. 3 dynasties, 3 fallen queens or heirs, 3 animals that outlived them. But some royal pets outlived not one monarch. They outlived every monarch their household ever had. Number 7 lives in a house in the Dutch countryside. Wilhelm II, the last German emperor, had ruled from Berlin for 30 years. He had the largest army in Europe. He had a navy he had personally obsessed over. He had uniforms he had designed himself. He had a withered left arm he had spent his entire life pretending did not exist. He had cousins on the British and Russian thrones. He could not manage any of them. He led Germany into a war he could not win. By the autumn of 1918, his own generals were telling him the army would no longer obey him. The Kiel Mutiny. Revolution in the streets. Ludendorff resigned. On November 9, 1918, Wilhelm boarded a train to the Netherlands. Queen Wilhelmina gave him asylum. The Weimar Republic was declared in Berlin the same day. In 1919, the new German constitution abolished the monarchy. There was no army left to defend it. Wilhelm bought a house at Doorn in 1920. He filled it with dachshunds. He chopped wood in the mornings. He wrote memoirs blaming everyone but himself. He gave interviews suggesting he might yet be recalled. He was not. The Nazis came to power in 1933. Wilhelm hoped they would restore him. They had no intention of doing so. He sent a congratulatory telegram after the fall of Paris in 1940. He died at Doorn in 1941. He left instructions not to be buried in Germany until the monarchy was restored. It never was. The dachshunds are the strange part. Wilhelm had a rotating pack of them across his years in exile. Photographs show them at his feet in the garden. When they died, they were buried on the grounds, in a small dog cemetery on the estate. The stones are still there. You can visit them today. They are the last row of graves that belonged to the last German emperor while he still had the legal right to own that piece of land. Wilhelm outlived his empire by 23 years. Several of his dachshunds outlived him. The dynasty's German future ended in 1918. Its measurable presence on Earth reduced, slowly, to a row of small headstones in a garden in Utrecht province. Number 6 sits on a bed at Osborne House. Queen Victoria died there on January 22, 1901. Her family was in the room. Her son Edward, the heir apparent, was nearly 60. Her grandson Wilhelm II, the same Kaiser we just left, was there, awkwardly holding her in her last hours. And on the bed, near her feet, was a small pomeranian named Turi. Household records confirm this. Contemporary press reports confirm it. She had asked for the dog to be brought in. Victoria did not preside over the fall of the British monarchy. That monarchy still exists. But she presided over the peak of the Victorian Empire, and everyone in the room knew that peak was ending with her. She had ruled for 63 years. She had become the country in a way no British monarch had since Elizabeth I. She had been in mourning for her husband Albert for 40 years. She dressed in black. Under her, the British Empire covered a quarter of the earth. It ran on ships, on railways, on missionaries, on telegraphs, on prestige. The prestige was more fragile than the ships. Germany was rising. The United States was rising. The Boer War, still being fought when Victoria died, was showing that farmers with rifles could bloody British troops for years. The empire she symbolized was already, quietly, past its peak. She was buried at Frogmore beside Albert, exactly as she had insisted. Turi was documented in the household inventories after the death. The Pomeranian did not return to Osborne. She lived out her days in the royal household under new management. The Victorian Empire began its long unwinding at that deathbed. 2 world wars finished it. India left in 1947. Africa unwound in the 1950s. The Suez Crisis in 1956 made clear that Britain no longer set the terms. Victoria's monarchy survived. Her empire did not. She was on the bed at the end. She had seen more of the empire up close than most cabinet ministers. The dog on her feet had seen the same thing. Only one of them was written into the Constitution. Some royal pets watched an emperor die on a bed. The next one watched an empire die by decree. Number 5 walks a gangway in Constantinople. On November 17, 1922, the last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, boarded a British warship in the harbor. 600 years of dynasty walked with him. The Ottoman Empire had ruled from Vienna's gates to Yemen at its peak. In its last decades, it was called the sick man of Europe. It had lost the Balkans in the 1910s. It had lost the Middle East in the First World War. It had been occupied by Allied troops in its own capital since 1918. 2 weeks before Mehmed left, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara, led by Mustafa Kemal, abolished the Sultanate. The document did not go through the palace. The assembly had the army. The Sultan had ceremonies. In March 1924, the assembly abolished the caliphate too. The Ottoman house was formally exiled. Male members of the family were barred from Turkish soil for the next 50 years. Mehmed went to Malta, then San Remo on the Italian Riviera. He rented a villa. He had almost no money. The Sultan of an empire that had counted its treasury in provinces was reduced to negotiating with an Italian landlord. He died in 1926, deep in debt. Italian creditors briefly seized his coffin for unpaid bills. He was eventually buried in Damascus. Turkey did not allow the family to be buried at home for decades. The palaces stayed. Topkapi became a museum. Dolmabahce became a state museum too. In the archives of these palaces, you can find inventories from the last imperial years. They list animals, horses in the stables, gazelles kept as court curiosities, birds. Some family members left with a few animals, according to household accounts, though the specific pets are difficult to trace. Family legend is heavy here. Verification is thinner. What is certain is that the palaces stayed, the animals stayed, and only the empire was gone. His descendants scattered across France, Britain, Egypt, and the United States. Some became academics. Some became doctors. One great-granddaughter of the last caliph was, for years, a fashion designer in New York. The imperial family, once the largest hereditary institution on earth, became a diaspora with a surname. So far, dynasties ended by revolution, by war, by paperwork. The next ones ended by referendum, by simple ballots counted in millions that quietly closed thousands of years of royal history. Number 4 leaves an airport in Tehran on January 16, 1979. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, boarded a plane with his wife Farah, their children, and a small group of the household. Farah has written that some of their pets, including cats, were with them. 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, at least in the story the Shah liked to tell about himself, left the runway with that plane. Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenids, the Sassanids, the Safavids, the Qajars, the Pahlavis. The chain the Shah invoked at Persepolis in 1971, when he threw a party for the world's leaders in a tented city in the desert, was the same chain his father, an army officer, had welded on in 1925. The peacock throne looked eternal. The palaces at Neavaran and Sadabad ran on servants, ceremony, and security. Farah presided over cultural festivals. Under the ceremony, the country was breaking apart. Savak, the secret police, had made the regime feared and hated. Inflation was crushing the poor. The clergy despised the modernization. The Shah had cancer, which he was hiding from almost everyone. Protests began in 1977. By 1978, they were unstoppable. Bloody Friday at Jaleh Square. Khomeini's cassette tapes arriving from exile in Paris played in every mosque. The army losing the will to shoot. On January 16th, the Shah left. He told the world he was going on vacation. His face on the tarmac told the truth. In February, Khomeini returned. In April, Iran became an Islamic republic by referendum. The vote was almost unanimous. The monarchy was legally abolished. The Shah, meanwhile, was traveling. Morocco, the Bahamas, Mexico, the United States briefly for cancer treatment, which triggered the hostage crisis at the embassy in Tehran. Panama, Egypt, 6 countries in 18 months. Farah has written about the cats, the household, the surreal indignity of being royalty in transit. The palaces at Neavaran were preserved by the Republic as evidence of monarchical excess, complete with family personal objects on display. The Shah died in Cairo on July 27, 1980. He is buried at the Al-Rifai Mosque. His son Reza Pahlavi still uses the title Crown Prince, though there is no throne to be Crown Prince of. He lives in the United States. Farah, still called Empress by supporters, lives between Paris and Washington. Their two other children, Layla and Ali Reza, died young, both by their own hands, in 2001 and 2011. The regime was called Eternal. It fell in months. The cats moved between 5 countries in the same time it took ministers to lose office. Number 3 stands in a garden in Cascais, Portugal. Umberto II was king of Italy for 34 days in 1946. He was in exile in Portugal for the next 37 years. His dogs were with him longer than his crown. The House of Savoy had ruled Italy since unification in 1861. Umberto's father, Victor Emmanuel III, had reigned through fascism. That was the problem. He had let Mussolini take power in 1922. He had signed the racial laws. He had presided over the alliance with Nazi Germany. The stain would not wash off the dynasty. Post-war Italy would decide by referendum whether the monarchy should continue at all. Victor Emmanuel abdicated in May 1946 in favor of his son Umberto, hoping a new face might save the crown. It did not. On June 2, 1946, Italians voted. Republic won by roughly 12.7 million to 10.7 million. The margin was under 10%. The dynasty had been defeated by a pen and a ballot. On June 13th, Umberto left Italy for Portugal. The new Italian constitution, in Article 13 of its transitional and final provisions, barred male Savoy heirs from Italian soil. The bar was not lifted until 2002, nearly 20 years after Umberto's death. He settled at Villa Italia in Cascais. Portugal in the 1950s and 1960s became a kind of collective retirement community for fallen royalty. Umberto knew the exiled kings of Spain, Bulgaria, and Romania personally. They walked their dogs on the same beaches. Umberto lived quietly. He used the private title Count of Tsarevich. Photographs from Cascais show him older, elegant, sad, with dogs in the garden. He died in Geneva in 1983. His body was flown to Hautecombe Abbey in French Savoy, the ancestral burial site. It was not brought to Italy. Even in death, he could not go home. His dogs, whichever ones were still alive at his death, died on Portuguese soil, having never been Italian. He was king of Italy in law for 34 days. He was exiled from Italy in law for 37 years. His dogs never had to hold a passport. So far, every dynasty had at least a country to be nostalgic for. The next 2 royal pets outlived not just a monarchy, but, in one case, the country itself. Number 2 dies in a hospital bed in Denver, Colorado. Peter II of Yugoslavia was the last king of a country that also does not exist anymore. He was crowned at 11, after his father Alexander I was assassinated in Marseille in 1934. His uncle Prince Paul served as regent. Peter grew up in Belgrade, being groomed for a role that already looked shaky. Yugoslavia itself was a stitched-together country. Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Bosnians, Macedonians, Montenegrins, in one kingdom born after the First World War. In March 1941, Prince Paul signed a pact with Nazi Germany. Days later, a coup in Belgrade rejected the pact and declared Peter of age. He was 17. Days after that, Germany invaded. Peter fled through Greece, then to Palestine, then to London. His government in exile operated out of Claridge's Hotel for the rest of the war. In Yugoslavia, resistance split between royalists under Mihailovic and communists under Tito. Tito won. In November 1945, the Yugoslav Assembly abolished the monarchy in absentia. Peter never returned. He was 22. He tried business ventures in the United States. Most failed. He drank heavily. He married a Greek princess, Alexandra. They had one son, Alexander, who inherited a title and no country. Peter died in Denver on November 3, 1970, aged 47, from complications of liver disease. He was the only European monarch of the modern era buried on American soil. His grave was at the St. Sava Monastery Church in Libertyville, Illinois. His household had scattered across the exile years. Yugoslavia continued without him for 46 more years. It survived Tito's death in 1980. It did not survive the ethnic wars of the 1990s. Slovenia and Croatia left in 1991, Bosnia in 1992, Macedonia in 1991. The last remnant, Serbia and Montenegro, dissolved in 2006. The country that had abolished Peter no longer exists on any map. In 2013, Peter's remains were repatriated, not to Yugoslavia, to Serbia. He was reburied at the Royal Mausoleum in Oplanak, where his father and grandfather already lay. He was buried in a country he had never ruled. He was later reburied in a country that had not existed when he was born. The map moved. He kept moving with it, dead. But at least Peter had lost a country that once had a king. The last ruler on this list lost a country that also voted his royal children out, while he was still alive, in exile, feeding birds. Number 1 is an old man in a castle in Coburg, Germany, watching from a distance as his family's kingdom disappears. Tsar Ferdinand I of Bulgaria was born in Vienna in 1861, a minor German prince from the Coburg family, a cousin of Queen Victoria's husband. In 1887, Bulgaria, freshly emerged from Ottoman rule, needed a monarch, and the great powers of Europe steered Ferdinand into the role. He arrived in Sofia and made himself Tsar. He was vain, cultured, obsessive, and cruel. He was also brilliant. He was a serious naturalist. He collected specimens. He built aviaries. He kept birds the way other monarchs kept horses. He picked the wrong sides. In the Second Balkan War of 1913, he attacked his own former allies and lost. In 1915, he joined Germany and Austria-Hungary in the First World War. In 1918, when the Bulgarian army collapsed, he abdicated in favor of his son Boris III. He was 57. He returned to Coburg and would live another 30 years in that German castle. He filled it with birds. Boris III ruled Bulgaria through the interwar years, a fragile constitutional monarch trying to navigate a Balkan country between Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. He allied with Germany reluctantly. He refused, uniquely among Axis leaders, to deport Bulgarian Jews to the death camps, and around 50,000 were saved as a result. He died suddenly in August 1943, shortly after a difficult meeting with Hitler. His 6-year-old son Simeon became Tsar Simeon II. He was too young to reign. The Soviet army entered Bulgaria in 1944. On September 8, 1946, a referendum was held under communist pressure. The people voted overwhelmingly to abolish the monarchy. Simeon, aged 9, was sent into exile with his mother and sister. He left Sofia by train. Ferdinand watched from Coburg. He was 85. He kept feeding his birds. He died on September 10, 1948, aged 87. His birds were fed at the same hour the next morning. Ferdinand's ornithological collections were substantial. His contributions to European natural history are documented in journals of the period. The birds outlived him in the cages. Bulgaria became a people's republic. Simeon grew up in exile in Egypt and Spain. He studied at a military academy in the United States. He worked in business for decades. And then, in 2001, in a story nobody would have predicted, he returned to Bulgaria as an ordinary citizen, formed a political party, and was elected Prime Minister of the Bulgarian Republic. He served until 2005. He is a common citizen. The monarchy has not been restored, and he has not sought to restore it. Ferdinand did not live to see any of that. The last time he was called Tsar with real meaning was in 1918, when his son sat on the throne. By the time he died in 1948, his son had been dead 5 years. His grandson was in exile at 11. His aviary still ate at the same hour every morning. The birds outlived the empire he had helped build. The empire had lasted 59 years. Some of the birds nearly matched it. The Tsar who cared most about birds outlived the dynasty he had founded on the throne. His scientific work survives in ornithological references. His crown does not survive anywhere. 10 palaces, 10 fallen dynasties, 10 small witnesses on 4 legs or 2 wings or in cages or on cushions. Every royal family in this video believed its house was permanent. Every one of them was wrong. And the strangest survivors were not the crowns, not the estates, not the constitutions. They were the animals. Fed by servants who no longer worked for royalty. Buried in gardens that no longer belonged to kings. Small proof that the mighty ended, and the small kept going. The palaces are museums now. The titles are private. The maps have been redrawn. And somewhere in the archives, a palace inventory still lists a dog by name, in the handwriting of a servant whose country no longer exists.